tap into yourself first. Start with you, whether it's figuring out what that meditation practice looks like. Start there and listen to your body, your heart, your womb, your intuition. Those are the things that are guiding you. And through your own transformations and through your own changes, other people will notice that.
Too often, Black women are a mere afterthought in conversations around wellness, but not in this space. On this podcast, the dialogue is always centered around women like you. Welcome to the podcast, but more importantly, welcome to the tribe. Be well, sis. As we're recording this today is, what's today's date? I don't even know anymore. Today is November 7th.
The 7th.
So just a few days after learning the election results, and I'm just exhausted. I'm absolutely exhausted. And I'm smiling. And I think I'm smiling because I'm literally holding back tears at this point. I don't want to cry. So let me just smile through it. So with that, I'm really excited to be speaking with Alishia McCullough, who is the author of Reclaiming the Black Body. Yes, guys, go out and get it, purchase it. It is so good. What I love about it too is that you have the questions, like the reflective questions at the end of the chapters, which I think would also make great for book club reading too.
Absolutely.
So go get it. But before we hop into the book, how are you? PMS. So physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Yeah, I really love that you started us off with an orientation to where we are. And so we are 2 days post-election results here. And you know, from a physical level, my body is actually responding to the trauma of the results. And so just for folks to know, overwhelmingly, you know, the United States decided to reelect Trump again as president. And so, you know, from a physical perspective, I've actually been in a lot of pain the past couple days. And so I know my body is responding to this like collective level of grief, of trauma, of pain, of disbelief, of disappointment, and maybe even confirmation around things that we already knew. Yep. And so, you know, I feel that tiredness and that fatigue. And, you know, one thing about trauma is that when we're experiencing trauma, the language part of our brain is actually in the back seat. And so it's really like the survival patterns, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, that are in the driver's seat, you know, taking over, or appease, or in the driver's seat. And so what I'm noticing is that I don't have a lot of words to kind of describe, you know, my exact experience of everything. But what I will name is that from the nervous system perspective of trauma, you know, I do feel those symptoms of survival strategies kind of kicking in. And so like you were saying, Cassandra, you know, your experience of smiling through the pain, that is that appeased response in the body, you know, doing the best that it can to like show up and like protect you in this moment. And at the same time, like I hear you saying, like there's these deeper emotions that want to come through, but just having that trauma pattern on top, trying to protect you so you can keep moving forward in this moment. And I definitely experience and feel that too. I feel like right now I'm more of a flight state. So I've just been doing things to keep myself busy, distracted, and again, these are ways our body protects us, but it does suck. It really sucks. So from a physical perspective, that's where I'm at. From an emotional perspective, I feel like that kind of ties in as well, where it's like emotionally, I do feel a lot, but my body's not expressing it in the moment. And I know that expression will come a lot later. So there's a part of me that's also like, right? Like, again, like I have to deal with this again, you know, type of vibe. Like I'm not looking forward to it. And then I think mentally, you know, I'm just doing my best to show up, you know, in all spaces. I think my situation is unique in that I currently don't live in the U.S., but I'm very familiar with, you know, the U.S. culture, being born and raised in North Carolina, living in the United States my whole life. And so I think there's a part of me that knows exactly what this experience is like when you wake up in your body in a white supremacist, capitalist, colonial environment, and you feel unsafe walking outside of your home in the daytime, especially, or at night, especially being from North Carolina, a Southern Bible Belt state. And there's also like, for me, a privilege of being a bit more disconnected, being here in Mexico, where I can walk out of this apartment and where I live now and go to the beach and just sit and clear my mind. And so there's this weird thing happening for me where it's like, I'm very aware of the experiences of my people, of what it was like being in the States and the impact on our bodies. But at the same time, like, I'm in gratitude for being in a different environment where I'm not as physically tapped into that experience as what I was before. And so holding space for a lot of complexities in this moment as well, too.
Yeah, yeah. Whew. So I live in Charlotte, so I think I was lulled to sleep because the neighborhoods and even the outskirts that were still close to Charlotte, not nothing, but overwhelmingly were like Harris and Walls like signage. Even homes that I remember had a Confederate flag at one point or were supporting Trump at one point. I noticed the signage has changed, and I was like, that is interesting because they had very big signs. For either party. So I was like, that's interesting. So I think I was lulled to sleep, but I'm going to step aside from this in a second. But one thing that I find really strange is that everything down ballot here in North Carolina has gone blue, except that something's in the water for me.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. But so going back to, you mentioned how other marginalized folks have essentially voted against their own rights, right? For a while. So let me go back. When I first met you online was in 2020.
Yes.
And I don't know how I came across your content, but it resonated with what was happening, especially at that time, right? So I'm like, yes, this all makes sense. And I was getting a lot of education from like the things that you were posting and sharing and talking about. And it made me think about how at that time was when I was first introduced to the term BIPOC. I had never heard that before. And then it picked up a lot of steam, and for me, it felt uncomfortable because I'm just like, well, why aren't we just keeping it? Because I felt like it started to replace Black.
Yes.
And I'm like, it's okay to say Black. It's okay to say indigenous or, Asian American, whatever. Right. And for me, it like lumped us all into one group. And my experience has been, we have very different experiences, and other groups don't necessarily identify with our struggle or care to often. Coming back to the election, looking at the exit polls, that feeling has just been confirmed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to name, like, holding space for all of that, putting that out in the atmosphere for folks to sit with, and also just name that, I think even that term BIPOC, something I've been sitting with is, where did it originate? And if I'm not mistaken, it really picked up in academia. And so then it makes me start to think about, who does it benefit for us to start using BIPOC? For us to lump in all people of color or people with expressions or experiences of marginalization, like, who does that benefit? And I'm like, as Black folks, we always do this thing where it's like we will in some ways sacrifice ourselves for the well-being of everybody else. Yeah. And that terminology even feels like an iteration of that, because we were willing to say, okay, maybe I am being erased, right? My experiences are being erased, but look, we're being inclusive, right? To all people. And that's historically been our ammo, if you want to say. And so I think it did erase us. It did erase our unique experiences. And like you said, we see it with the polls when we see, these large numbers of Latinx folks, Latins, Hispanics, Mexicanos, voting in favor of Trump. Like, that's literally the opposite of what's helpful for communities, or even other communities that would be considered immigrants in the United States, voting against their own rights to be in the United States. I'm just like, what is happening right now? And I have to also hold accountable, our own community, especially when we look at the number of Black men who also voted in favor of Trump because of the misogyny that exists in our communities and our refusal to see Black women as valuable in our voices and our education and all of the contributions that we've made as worthy and deserving of, success and, leadership. And so we see it all across communities when we start to really look into demographics of like the male, or female or women, man, or across even the gender spectrum, across the age spectrum. We're seeing, again, people just, voting not in their best favor, but a lot of it being rooted in these systems of oppression.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Man,
Yeah,
there's this. It's just so much to like
it
unpack,
is.
right? It is so much, but I'm really happy about
Yeah.
reclaiming the Black body. I really am, because there is a lot to unpack with our own experience within our own bodies.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to go back to 2020 really quickly again, because 2020 you had a huge hashtag go very viral, and for really good reason, because yes, we should amplify melanated voices. And was that one of the sparks to writing this book, or what inspired writing this book? 'Cause I know this has been your work,
Yeah.
your yeah. Mm-hmm.
I personally feel like, even with the movement, so just to get into that a bit, so this movement, Amplify Melanated Voices, that really came about in 2020, started from my own experiences of oppression. At that time, I was working in a mental health agency, and I was one of the only, Black staff in the company. And what I was noticing was that I was experiencing a lot of the covert racism. It wasn't very
Mm-hmm.
overt. It wasn't in your
Mm-hmm.
face, but it was that very quiet racism,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of control and domination and micromanaging and all of the things. And so what I was noticing is that I didn't really have a voice in my workplace. I didn't really feel respected and valued in my workplace. And so what I did was create an Instagram account where I could really talk about the issues that mattered to me: eating disorders, social justice, anti-oppression, decolonization, really creating a platform to like talk about those things in a safe way. And what happened was, as you named, you resonated with the content, but so many other folks were resonating as well. And so I would, connect with folks from California or from Texas or from Germany or, all over the world. And I'm like, wow, people are also having these similar experiences, different, right? Depending on the context and where we're
Mm-hmm.
from, but, very similar experiences. And I feel like I have a community here. And so, through that process of like posting on my social media, 2020, came. And what happened was, we were experiencing both the global pandemic of COVID-19 alongside, the racial trauma and dehumanization of Black bodies. And so in that process, I became more and more enraged, with the experiences that we were having every day, the healthcare disparities, particularly within our communities when COVID, first hit. And it really drove me to get on social media and start like talking more about these type of things. And so I was sharing my experiences with work. I was sharing systemic experiences. And a good friend of mine, Jessica Wilson, who lives in Sacramento, California, she and I were talking about like our shared experiences within the eating disorders field, where we're the only Black, practitioners. We don't have a lot of clients who look like us, and the clients who do look like us, they're not getting their needs met. They're
Mm-hmm.
being misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. And there were just so many other things that we were noticing. So we started talking and really sharing these similarities. And we said, well, let's create a movement that really focused, and not even like a purposeful movement. It was let's just like talk about this thing that happens. We have a lot of folks here who, we have following in common, people who are saying some similar things. Let's tag them and tell them to share about this information. And we said, we're going to call it Amplify Melanated Voices. We're amplifying our voices as Black people, as melanated folks, and sharing our experiences of what it's like being in these fields. And so it really started off more as like an opportunity for us to get our voice out there, to resist our current oppressive environments. And when we posted, it was the day right after everybody was posting their Black squares for the murder of George Floyd. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think what happened was, people were posting the Black squares, but they were like, well, what else can we do? Like a Black squares, whatever, but like, what more can we do?
Uh-huh.
And I think when they saw Amplified Melanated Voices, we did give a call to action. We asked people, for example, to mute that white noise, which essentially meant, use a feature on Instagram at that time where you can mute different pages. And so mute the typical standardized pages that you follow and really turn on your notifications for Black pages and brown pages and, other people of color. And so, we asked them, this week, I want you to notice your news feed and see what shifted and changed just by even that one small step of
Mm-hmm.
muting the white noise. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in that that challenge or that movement, we were also telling people, examine, what does your boardrooms look like? Are Black folks being paid? Are they being hired within your companies? What does it look like when you turn on your television? Who are the people that you're seeing most voices amplified? And so it was also this like awareness of this awakening in some ways. And in that movement, things just accelerated. And before I knew it, I had all of these followers from all over the world, people wanting to support, people wanting to donate to Black Lives Matter, and outside of those things I'll name, people were also telling me, hey, I got a promotion at work, or hey, I had this opportunity as a result of your movement, or, here in Australia, we're doing this specific thing, to support the movement. And so it was really this global call to action that was not even intentionally made, but really started from our own internal experiences. And, that just branched out and resonated, with a lot of folks. And so when I think about this book, for example, this book similarly kind of came about in that way where I'm just doing the work. I'm in the field. I'm noticing disparities, I'm noticing where there's gaps, and I'm doing my best to show up and like fill those gaps, whether it's creating an online eating disorder group for Black folks, or when I was working in person with folks, intentionally inviting Black folks into spaces of, this is what eating disorders are, this is your relationship with your body, here's what trauma looks like and manifests in our communities. And so these intentional efforts to really bring about awareness and give people options and choice. And through that experience, I had a friend of mine who reached out and was like, you should write a book about all the things that you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, it's just my practice. I'm just doing the things, right? And she's like, no, I want to put you in contact with my agent. And so I ended up meeting with my current agent, and we talked through, the work that I was doing at the time. And she's like, that's book worthy, right? That's worth putting into a book. This is a really important topic. I think you should really take that serious. And so I did. I decided to take the route, and, we worked on a proposal, and from there just started talking more and more about the experiences. And I started to notice like, wow, this is revolutionary. I'm filling a gap in a field that no one else has done thus far. And I feel very privileged and lucky to have had this experience to write this book and bring it into light. And even my own process throughout the journey of discovering parts of myself and covering my family stories, looking back at my clients and really starting to connect the dots between their experiences and even come up with new theories and terminology and really look at things from this holistic viewpoint. I just feel so lucky to have had that opportunity to be in this like journey and exploration that brought about this book.
And we're so happy that I'm so happy. And I know the world, everybody who reads it is also going to be so happy that you've like up on all the steps that happened to allow this book to come to fruition. I think it's really, really revolutionary, like you said. And it's just going to be just so many conversation starters for people, so many things to give reflection for people like, oh, this is why I feel the way that I do. And here are some steps that I can take to start to heal from the different traumas that unfortunately is so common that we just don't talk about, right? Speaking of terminology, so in the beginning chapters, one of the ones that I noticed was an eating imbalance. So talk to me about what is an eating imbalance versus an eating disorder.
Yeah, I love that you asked that because language is so important. And so what I wanted to really do is make sure that, folks were able to find themselves in this work. And so if we're using terminology that within our communities they don't have access to or don't resonate with, then of course they're not going to get the support that they need. And so when I thought about the word disorder, I thought about just how much stigma we have in our community already just about mental health in general. And so we have all this stigma, and then we hear, oh, I have a disorder. We start to think, well, I'm not a disordered person, or, that sounds like a bad thing. I don't want to be labeled as that. So I'm not even going to look into it, And so, and for rightful reasons, I want to name too. And I get into this in the book where, within our communities for the longest, we've experienced so much oppression from the westernized healthcare system, whether that's for psychology, our overall like physical health, or, all different fields have been rooted and based in this this level of racism and this level of ableism. And so I do want to name there's a reason why we have mistrust. There's a reason why we have stigma. And I think, what I've really sat with is, okay, it's there and it's valid and I understand. And then how can I bring this information to folks and meet them where they're at? And so a part of that looks like changing and shifting the language so that it becomes more accessible. And so moving away from disorder was like a part of becoming more accessible to our community and using the word imbalance, because imbalance is, life is about balance. We have our things that, are more in flow and in alignment, and things that, are not in alignment, but there's fluidity to it in that we can do something about it. It's an opportunity to create more balance, and that in itself feels more generative. It feels more creative. It feels more like within our autonomy to do, and not as like hard set, not as rigid as what a disorder might be. And so, beyond like creating this space for us to tap into through the word imbalance, I also started studying the history of ancient medicines. And so looking at, for example, Qigong, looking at different other Asian-based practices or African-based practices, or, really exploring what were the indigenous communities doing, at the time, and what did this word look like in our communities. And imbalance was really helpful because it really studied the body from a holistic perspective of, when we look at our energy patterns, when we look at, different states of our body, we're not ever in a state of like fixation. There's always this movement that's happening within us. And so the imbalance really speaks to the movement journey of, at any point, we can always tap back into our bodies and listen and say, what do you need right now? What do you need to feel more full and flow and abundance? And I think that's also a part of that imbalance, is like it's rooted in indigenous practices and traditions and teachings and wisdom, but it also is like this opportunity for us to connect with our body in just such a different way than what we've been taught.
Yeah. Ooh. So what does an eating imbalance look like? Because I think you've kind of touched on it, an eating disorder, it has become very stigmatized, and we have an idea of what that may look like, right? So how does an eating imbalance show up in our everyday lives that we may even overlook?
Yeah, absolutely. And so like I'll think about, and I'll use myself as an example. I've dealt with eating imbalances in my life on and off, to be quite honest with you. And in that journey, what I really noticed is that and I'll just kind of reframe it and say, is my eating supporting my well-being at this time? Am I nourishing myself to a point where I am experiencing, the most well-being that I can in this exact moment? And so, for example, if I, am nourishing in the morning, but I haven't had a lunch, and then I, wait all the way until 11 o'clock at night to eat dinner. But in that phase, I'm like very cranky and I'm annoyed and I'm angry because I'm hungry, right? That is an imbalance within the body because my blood sugar levels need to be, more balanced in the moment. My blood pressure may need to be balanced as well. And so the glucose levels, there's, all of these internal systems that are at play. And now my emotions are being affected. So they're out of, balance as well. And so a part of it is recognizing like, what are the practices and what are the devotions that I need to set in place for myself so that I can really thrive and experience the most well-being in my body so that my body can show up and support me, And so that's what it looks like, is this check-in of like, what does my body need in this moment? And so particularly with food, we have these imbalances, whether for long-standing times we're not nourishing ourselves. And so then in Western culture, we call that anorexia nervosa, whether we're having experiences of, not listening to our body and just consuming and consuming and consuming because our hunger cues are, no longer in communication with us, or we're not listening to those well. And so we call that binge eating, or whether we're experiencing these compulsory, behaviors where we're consuming food, but then, in some ways we're excreting that food from our body, and sometimes that could be called bulimia. And so, we have these Western terminologies for these systems that just are out of balance within ourselves, and for multiple different reasons, which I lay out in the book, whether it's systemic, it's historical, it's epigenetic, these things have been stored in our body. And so when it becomes long-standing, that's when we start to get what Western culture calls eating disorders, is when these patterns become long-standing of imbalance.
Yeah. Ooh. So typically, whenever we think about like, stereotypically we'll say, whenever we think about these things, we don't necessarily we don't see ourselves in that. But these happen, we experience these things as well. In all of your practice and in all of your research, what do you think are some of the common denominators as to why Black women, Black girls are experiencing these eating imbalances and things, disordered eating?
Yeah, from a larger perspective, what I really noticed is that within our community as Black folks, we're very disconnected from our bodies. And so, for example, we're very quick to pick up a magazine at the store that's like, how do you lose, 20 pounds before the summer, right? And literally
Mm-hmm.
follow that regimen as if it's like biblical,
Right. Yep.
or, we are more likely to go to our doctors and our doctors tell us, you just need to do this thing here, lose the weight, or, do this certain thing. And we don't question it. We're more likely to say, well, my doctor said this, and so this is what I need to do. And so there's also a sense of like us, being disconnected from our self-autonomy in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways, and also from our body signals and tapping into ourselves and saying, okay, actually, let me sit down and let me give myself space. And like, even if that's like, I'm turning on some meditation music or whatever the music is, or maybe it's some other form of like just allowing you to center and ground within yourself and asking yourself the question of, where's that area of my body where I'm experiencing that pain? Where's the area in my body where I'm experiencing the illness? And then talking to that area, like slowing it down enough to listen and talk to it. Like, we have not been conditioned to do that. We
Right.
have actually been conditioned to do the opposite. And so when we
Opposite.
think
Yep.
historically, from our communities, it's go, go, go. Your body's
Yep.
communicating, I'm hungry, but you have to get to work, right?
Yep.
And so you don't have time to stop and get a snack. You just have time to like get to work and ignore that signal. Historically, even for our survival, when we look at those of us who are descendants of enslaved folks, when you're, working on the plantation from sun up to sundown, yeah, you're hungry. Yeah, you might be experiencing menstruation or,
Mm-hmm.
some, perimenopause or some other, type of thing in your
Mm-hmm.
body. But what you have to do in that moment to survive is that you have to ignore all of those things your body's telling you so that you
And
can
produce.
survive that day and
Mm-hmm.
wake up and do it again.
Yep.
And so for
Yep.
generations, we have these patterns of disconnection in order to survive. And I will say, I think we're just getting to the point where we're having the education and awareness about it. And so then it's like working with those patterns in the body to decide, is this pattern still serving me in this moment? Or is this something that I can let go of, so that I can experience another choice, within my body and within my life?
Yeah. You hit on the nail on the head in talking about like the survival,
Mm-hmm.
and I think so many of us have been conditioned to just survive and not
Yes.
necessarily thrive. And the reason I even am like picking on that specific point is because I think about, I follow a woman named Crutches and Spice. Her real name is Imani. I forgot her last name. But she's a disability activist as well as a communication specialist. And she has been naming for as long as I can remember how after the pandemic that we would see a rise in disordered eating habits, and we see it. We've seen it in real time with people who don't necessarily need Ozempic and those type of things, but are taking it just to be thin. And I've
Yeah.
seen like essentially the erasure of the body positivity movement and things.
Yeah.
And she mentioned that in like historically speaking, it's because, and she references the 1918 flu pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because of pandemics, there's a rise in like eugenics thinking. So because we want to prove that we are fit and that we are healthy and that we can be productive members of the society, that we need to fit a certain aesthetic as well.
Say it.
Yeah, so these are all like survival things, right? And again, we just don't know how to thrive. And I'm talking to myself right now. In order to thrive, there has to be a moment of discomfort and naming the things that you see within yourself, and then choosing to like do the opposite, maybe of what mainstream culture tells you to do.
Absolutely.
Because I'll
Yeah.
be honest with you, I've been thinking about some Ozempic myself. I'm just
Listen, that's real.
like maybe I should, you know what I mean? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah, get into it. So yeah, just to continue to get into it, right? And say, yeah, all the things you shared and how you framed it was so perfect. When we're coming off the heels of, quote unquote, the heels of the pandemic, because we're still in it. We want to name that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks are seeking this sense of control, of safety, right? Of how do
Mm-hmm.
I, reacclimate myself back into society in this new world in
Yep.
ways that, allow for me to, experience a sense of safety. I go back to that word safety. And so in
Mm-hmm.
my book in chapter, I want to say it's chapter 5, where I talk about fat phobia in the Black community, I talk about, when it comes to divesting from fat phobia, it's not just saying, I just want to divest. I just want to divest. I don't want to be a part of the system anymore. Like, while that would be great, it's not as
Mm-hmm.
simple as that, because particularly when it comes to Black bodies, there's a part of it that, yes, is being anti-oppressive, being against the system of fat phobia, understanding that the roots of fat phobia is actually rooted in anti-Black racism, that started in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century with the transatlantic slave trade and, the ways in which Europeans demonized our bodies. And so, even with that history and even with that awareness, there's also this other side of that's happening for us where it's like, I live in an anti-Black society. I live in a colonial society. I live in a white supremacist society. I live in a capitalist society. And so with those factors, I'm aware, for example, I can't necessarily change my skin tone, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't, if I'm a woman, I can't necessarily, yes, I want to be mindful of my
Mm-hmm.
language here, but yes,
Mm-hmm.
we can, shift and change our
Mm-hmm.
gender, but
Mm-hmm.
the expressions that we experience as, people who've been socialized as women and
Mm-hmm.
the misogyny that we experience, that we've already had the experience. We can't necessarily shift that. And so for a
Right.
lot of folks, there's then this conversation of, well, if I can't do those things, well, one thing I can do is change my body, because we do know
Yep.
that folks in larger bodies do experience oppression, and,
Mm-hmm.
that's systemic, that's real, just like every other form of oppression. And so, a lot of folks are saying, well, Wegovy or Ozempic are the solutions. They're the way out. They're the way I can gain this respect or this
Mm-hmm.
worthiness or, just feel different in my body. And a lot of us are going towards that option. And I just want to debunk some shame and say, completely understand why we would do that. It is, a form of our survival, and saying,
Yeah.
this is something I can hold on to and shift and change with everything else that kind of just feels very chaotic and out of my control. This is the one
Yes.
thing that I feel like could be within my control, right?
Yes.
So I want to just name for Black women, femmes, other folks who are listening, and just say, there's no shame in that. And it's your body, and you have total autonomy over what you decide to do with your body. My stance on all of this has been education and giving us what we need so we can make informed decisions. And so, for example, when we talk about Wegovy or Ozempic, a drug that is typically being used to treat diabetes and, manage blood sugar levels and things like that, it can, for example, when we're using it solely for weight loss, cause intestinal issues. There haven't been any full long-term studies to talk about the implications of Ozempic. But I will name that a lot of my friends that are working as psychiatric nurse practitioners, for example, talk about, the ways in which people are more disconnected from their body with these drugs, because the goal of them is to turn down your hunger signals, to turn down the signals of your body so that your body can change and lose the weight, so that you're not as hungry or you're not, eating, as much as what you would. And so, I think that I get it all. I'm just holding space for the totality of the story while also offering informed information to folks and saying how do we find ways to tap into more mindfulness, and slow down and listen to our bodies. And maybe without even the use of a weight loss drug, the slowing down and listening to our bodies and giving our bodies more of what it need could consequently make the changes that our body desires and that we want for our body, without us having to rely on the drug. Right.
Yeah.
I'll name for myself, moving to Mexico is so different from the US in that I'm walking a lot more. I don't have a car here. I walk everywhere I go, and I'm sometimes walking for sometimes an hour, a day to go to the grocery store or whatever. There's a lot more sunlight where I live. I know on the East Coast, we're in November, so y'all are experiencing that fall winter. But here, I literally walked out and was sweating yesterday because it's hot as hell. So, that's the whole thing, right? But, being in a different environment, has been so helpful for my body because I have more energy. I will name not that it was my goal, but I have lost weight since being here because of the constantly walking, not having the same stressors necessarily as what the US, what it was like back when I was living in the US, having access to more sun, so that vitamin D constantly in my body, and so there's these environmental things that, I've noticed shift. And what I encourage folks to do is, in what ways that feel accessible to you, can you make small shifts in your environment that support your body to thriving, to feeling the best and most optimal that it can be. And keeping in mind, for folks who, experience disabilities and other, not having as much access to their body or movement, there's always ways we can access that, whether for folks who have been paralyzed, depending maybe waist down, maybe it's moving the top body or tapping the finger or focusing on the area of the body. Throughout the book, I really try my best to give the most accessible options so that we can all tap in and tune in to what this liberation and freedom can look like.
I'm so grateful that you mentioned the different ways that we can just tap into come back home to ourselves, right? So going back to the survival piece, just the fact that we're trying to survive, you mentioned the hormonal changes that can happen. Just us constantly, our adrenal glands are so fatigued. They are working triple time or just to maintain, and just being in an environment where you can just step away and tune out. And if we're not able to be in that environment, we have to create that environment.
Exactly.
If we're going to really thrive and not just survive this thing, we really have to be so intentional with everything.
Yeah.
The foods that we eat, how much we move our bodies. I was thinking to myself how the grocery store is literally a mile away. I could walk. If I'm getting just a couple of items, I could walk. And I'm just so programmed to hop in the car for 2 minutes to get there. So it is super important for us to make decisions as to, make some changes that are going to be lasting, that are going to be helpful and impactful for us, not only our physical bodies, but also our mental health and all of those things as well.
Yeah. And if I can, because I love that you're getting into this accessibility component and ways that we can shift in small ways to support our bodies. And I just want to name for folks that are listening, that are I still don't know what that looks like. I am working a lot. I don't even have the capacity to think about it. I had an experience where I had to relocate and back home to live with my parents briefly before moving to Mexico. And so when I was in that environment, my parents live in a very southern part of North Carolina. And so as I was naming before, I was walking through the neighborhood, seeing the Blue Lives Matter. They actually had a Blue Lives Matter parade in the neighborhood, interestingly enough. And, I'm seeing the Trump flags, I'm seeing the Confederate flags, and this is just me walking around the neighborhood. So within my body, my actual cortisol levels are heightened. I don't feel safe,
Yeah.
And so just to name, that is not an example of pushing past discomfort and deciding I'm just going to continue to go for the walk, because it's actually doing adverse effects for your body. My recommendation for folks who are in that situation would be, what I had to do is look up, okay, what is a park near me that I might be able to walk around that feels safe, And so I would drive to the park and just walk around maybe 3 times, 2 times, whatever I had the time for. And that was my mode of movement for that day. Or, something else I did was I got on Amazon and ordered some magnesium cream, because I was doing all this Googling. Magnesium cream is good for muscles. It's good for the body. So I started using that as a form of helping reduce inflammation in my body, help balance hormones. And that might have been, for that jar, it might have been $10 on Amazon plus shipping, right? Or even in this moment, as we're doing this interview, I'm using my red light therapy belt. Now, can I go to the salon and pay $2,000 for red light therapy treatment? Absolutely not, right? But what I can do is order this $15 Amazon belt that I just wrap around my waist, and it helps also, reduce inflammation in the body, promote cellular regeneration. And so I just want folks to know these are accessible ways that we can tap in and support our bodies. It's through these lower reduced cost, or through these adjustments, that we make in our schedule, that we still get the benefits, even if it's not this huge extravagant thing that everybody names as self-care or wellness.
Yeah, for sure. And I also want to piggyback on that and mention that, so the audience is predominantly Black women, and we are so conditioned to do for others, to give to others. we need to reframe that. Like, give to ourselves first, take care
Yes.
of ourselves first. And sometimes it is really simple, buying the magnesium cream, giving yourself like a massage. If physical touch is your thing, like give yourself that physical touch sometimes. You know what I mean? How are you feeding yourselves? I know when I realized that I would obsess about what my kids eat and then eat trash myself.
Mm-hmm.
No, like, yeah, they need to be good, but I also need to be good. So what
Absolutely.
am I feeding myself? I can take a couple of minutes and throw something together that is full of whole foods,
Yeah.
And another thing that I think will be helpful for folks if they don't meditate. Meditation is really, really great because we are so used to being go, 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 push through the pain, whether it's like mental, physical. Meditation makes you sit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the type of person that when I'm nervous, when I'm anxious, when I'm stressed, I get active. Like, how can I do all the things at once? And nothing gets done, right? But
Yep.
I'm busy. Meditation has helped me, forced me to like sit down for 5 minutes and just breathe.
Yes.
And all of that is going to contribute to like your physical body. So with all of that, talk to me about what is one thing or two that you want folks to take away from this conversation and or reclaiming the Black body.
Yeah, I'm really going to piggyback off of where you left us off with when you talked about prioritizing ourselves as Black women. And I really want to just get into something I wrote in the book is that the work that we do within ourselves is what ripples out into the community. And so we do have to start with ourselves first in this. And so my book, when I wrote Reclaiming the Black Body, Nourishing the Home Within, is actually for us as Black women and femmes. And it's for us to hold ourselves accountable for our own healing. Like, we probably have heard before, but no one's coming to save us, and so
Truly.
it's for us as a community and within ourselves to really show up and support ourselves in the best way. And so this book is about, exploring all of the conditioning that we've been ingesting, right? If we want to use that word, we've been ingesting a lot of conditioning and it's not been good for our body. We see the impacts that it has for our body, whether it's through chronic pain and illness, whether it's through, a disconnection from our own like nourishing signals, whether it's, overall just experiencing ourselves as, not worthy or less than or taking up less space or whatever that looks like for you. This book is about exploring where and how those conditionings occurred and then guiding us. It's like a roadmap to guide us back home to the body through the questions, as you mentioned, through somatic practices. All of it is about coming back home to the body. And so what I want folks to know and what I want, those that are listening is just to say, tap into yourself first. Start with you, whether it's figuring out what that meditation practice looks like. Start there and listen to your body, your heart, your womb, your intuition. Those are the things that are guiding you. And through your own transformations and through your own changes, other people will notice that. And when they notice that, they'll be like, well, what did you do? How did you get there?
Right.
And through that, you can share that. And so that's a sharing of energy that you've already cultivated within that then gets expressed through someone else. And then maybe they share it with the next person. And we just continue to ripple and ripple and ripple until we do start to shift and change the culture. And so, that is my really ask for Black women is like, start within, prioritize yourself.
Yes. Ooh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful for this conversation, especially on today where I'm just like, I woke up like, I don't want to do any of this. So Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your light, your brilliance always, and just for sharing with us, not only online, but in a book. So Reclaiming the Black Body. Guys, go get it. I will have the link to purchase down in the show notes and in the bio. So yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Well Sis. If you'd like to get in touch with us, there's a link in the show notes. Be Well Sis is hosted by me, Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, and produced by Edit Audio. Don't forget to hit follow so you never miss an episode. Until next time, be well, sis.